Welcome, everyone, to this talk, When Art Meets Environmental Justice. I'm very excited to be the moderator of this talk tonight. My name is Kate Huber, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Culture Studies. So environmental justice, for those of you who might not know what that is, it addresses the uneven distributions of the benefits and burdens of extraction economies. The definition of the environment in environmental justice is not nature or something outside of human society. It's the places that we know. It's the interactions with water and air that you've also highlighted so well in this opening activity. So as many people in environmental justice have written, it's places where we live, work, play, and pray. The Dutch often say that there is no nature in the Netherlands, and environmental justice artists, activists, and academics would say nature is the water and the air that we drink and breathe, even the microplastics that we're all inhaling right now, because they're in all the air now. So the places that you see on this slide, did anyone recognize them? No, that's fine. So these are all places in the Netherlands that actually bear a disproportionate burden of the pollution produced by extracting, processing, and producing various items. So for example, you can see IJmuiden here on the left, where Tata Steel is located, that processes iron ore. In the middle is a picture of Groningen, where natural gas is extracted. And then on the far right is Dordrecht, where Chameur plant leaks plastics. They make fluoropolymers, and they are in the air, the water, and these have caused carcinogenic materials to build up in people's bodies, and they're accumulating particularly in breast milk. Residents living in the vicinity of Chameur have been asked not to eat vegetables out of their gardens if they happen to grow them there. So pollution and harm are disproportionately imposed on people, animals, plants, and places, both in the Netherlands, but also around the world. Many who do not have a seat at the proverbial table are directly affected by these uneven distributions, and industries and states take advantage of those who are positioned on the margins of power by class, race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, ability, religion, or region. So we can think of rural areas that might lack access to resources, but also inner city communities that are near motorways, for example. But these communities are not silent. To push back on intersecting forms of environmental and social oppressions, those who most deeply affected by environmental harms have used art, literature, and performance for generations to communicate their struggle, to show that science is not the only location where valuable forms of knowledge are produced. Important ways of understanding complex and seemingly insurmountable environmental crises emerge in cultural works that disrupt expectations, reclaim agency, and assert resilience. I am delighted and honored to introduce today's speaker, whose artworks and curation do just that. Michele Horrigan is an artist and independent curator whose ongoing arts-based research on Europe's largest bauxite refinery challenges the polluting industries we often ignore to continue consuming products and engaging in lifestyles that are deeply unsustainable. These lifestyles devastate the bodies and ecosystems of certain groups of people, animals, plants, and places. Michele lives and works in Askeaton, Limerick, in Ireland. She studied art at the Stadtschule in Frankfurt. Recent exhibitions of her artworks include Publix in Helsinki, Schloss Brits in Berlin, Tenerife Espacio de las Artes, Lismore Castle Arts, Ava International, Limerick and Temple Bar Gallery Studios in Dublin. Since 2006, she is founder and curator of Askeaton Contemporary Arts, facilitating artist experimentation and residencies in rural County Limerick. Many artworks made in this context have subsequently been presented throughout the world in exhibitions, art biennials, and film festivals. She is editor and publisher of ACA Public, with over 20 titles exploring many meanings between art and the public realm. In 2024, she was curator of the 22nd edition of the Tulka Festival of Visual Arts in Galway, opening in November, and that opened in November, and was entitled The Salvage Agency, a citywide exhibition and public program considering the agency and role of art in contemporary ecology and environmental study. So please welcome, help me welcome Michele to Tilburg.
Well, that was a glowing introduction. Thank you, Kate. And thank you, everybody who's made me feel so welcome here this week. Kate for the invitation, Clara, who has helped to install the exhibition, along with several other of the students this week as well. Thanks to Sean, Marion, and Peter as well, who were part of the kind of collaboration of workshopping and installing the exhibition. I'm very happy to be here. It's my first time being in Tilburg, but not the Netherlands, and I'm really glad that you've trotted out this glorious weather this week. I needed that. It's been a long, cold winter, rainy winter in Ireland, so thanks for that. As Kate said, my work is, what I'm focusing on this evening is when art meets environmental justice, and I'm particularly looking at a project called Stigma Damages that has been evolving over more than a decade now at this stage. And to give you a sense of that, I suppose a kind of a history, it's mainly focused on a refinery in the west of Ireland. And this was a refinery I would have grown up beside. It was an intrinsic part of my life for many years, and it took going away actually to study in the Industrial, putting that distance geographically between me and sort of where I was from, to really be able to look at that place and think about it in a very critical way, and then start also to make work about that. I think initially when I began to make work about it, it was about making sense of that place and that memory I had as a child and a teenager. But subsequently, it has now moved on to bearing witness, to becoming perhaps a toolkit or a useful tool for other people who are challenging these type of industries where they are. This is a still shot actually of a video I will show later. So I'm going to talk through a couple of things, outlining, I suppose, the process, the impact that it had on the environment and the region in terms of animal but also human health, what has happened in the past, what is currently happening now, and then to finish up, I'm going to show two very short videos. One is 10 minutes, and then I'll outline the second video, which is 4 minutes, and then we finish up with that, and I believe there's going to be a Q&A. So I would ask you to hang on to those cues for now, write them down. If I'm speaking too fast, because as I said to students yesterday in the workshop, I get kind of passionate about this, so if I speak too fast, or if there's a word in my West Ireland dialect, just put up your hand and say, look, I don't understand, or I didn't quite catch that, or if something's not clear, fire away. But yeah, just keep those questions till the end otherwise. So Aughinish Alumina, just to give you a sense of where it is. For those of you who maybe are not familiar with where the map of Ireland, which is fair enough, my geography, my understanding of geography in the Netherlands wouldn't be top class either. We are, the area and region I'm talking about are roughly over here. So you can see along this here is the Shannon Estuary. It's our major waterway. It goes all the way up along here. And this is more or less the side I'm talking about here. So you have Limerick here, and you have Clare on this side. The Burren exists around here as well, which is a UNESCO site, nature site. The Shannon Estuary itself is an area of conservation, and then you have this massive site where the refinery is here. Zooming in on the map again, you see it. I'm just going to point your attention to the other red dot. It's slightly bigger than the dot here, Aughinish. I grew up here in Askeaton, which is roughly maybe 5 or 6 kilometres from there. Zooming in again, you get a sense of where it is. So back in the 70s, a Canadian company called Alcan, which would be the Aluminium Company of Canada, started to prospect the area, looking for a particular part where a ship that would be large enough, or like the depth was deep enough, could dock and set themselves up. And they came across this beautiful island called Aughinish, which in Irish would translate roughly to Horse Island. And they found that the depth here was just right to bring up a large ship. So the process of aluminium is that it's bauxite ore is the raw product. It's brought through a refining process, so it has to be mined first, usually in more southern regions where the rock is formed in warmer climates. And then it would be shipped to a refinery, or a refinery most of the time is often beside that. Here what happens is the bauxite comes in, it's used on a conveyor belt along this really long port here, which is, I think it's a mile in length, comes into the containers, goes through a very high energy, high heat calcinated process. A lot of chemicals are involved. And the product that comes out at the end is alumina, which is a kind of a white powder that goes on into either products such as makeup, deodorant, or it goes on to produce aluminium. And if it goes on to aluminium, it goes on into a smelter system, which is always somewhere else. You'll never get a refinery and a smelter close to each other because they take up a huge amount of energy. It will probably crash your national grid. What's left over? So the alumina takes off on the boat again, heading off to wherever else it goes. And then this red here is what's left on site. And what you're looking at here, I suppose you get a good sense of it there as well. This was an island to begin with, a tidal island. And so when the industry came in, they broke ground in about 1978. It was the largest building site in Europe up until 1982 when production started. And they reinforced this area that would have been, this kind of when the tide's in, you're on the island. When it's out, you can leave. They reinforced it as a bridge, so it was made accessible. So you can see the proximity of how close it is to the water systems here. These are mud flats along this area. There's water everywhere. Local activists would say that the first pond, which is this one on top, was never fully lined properly, and so is leaching or bleaching directly into the river. There's an airport just slightly off up here, so when you're coming out in flights you can see this. The second pond arrived in around 2010 and is filling up fast. At the moment, it's coming in at about 450 acres and a height of somewhere around, I think, 30 metres. Expansion would push that to another 33, 34 metres. And when I say expansion, I don't mean out, I mean up, because you see where it is geographically in relation to the water. So production started in 82, and then a couple of, shortly after, in the preceding years, some strange things started to happen in the immediate environment, and it affected the animals first that were living off the land. So there was moments where, also what would happen, I suppose when you're looking at the site, it's important to note that there would be two stages of pollution on site. One would be the very visible red mud, that's the waste product of the process. That includes your leftover bauxite dust and all of the chemicals that went into the making of that process to get it going. These are open pits. I mean, you can see them from space. This is a Google map. So on site, you have to get back that there's this, and then there's also the air pollution. So there's two forms of pollution. The pollution that's happening there in the air, if there's what would happen certainly in the 80s, though it doesn't happen so much anymore, is there would be blowouts. So chemicals would get caught up there, and they would have to just flush out that system to get it out. And what would happen was all of that, it was like a kind of a white sludge or a white grainy powder. It would just spread wherever the wind would let it, going as far as here, but also reports of up along here, farther into Kerry, more south. It was quite eventful times. Activist groups began to raise awareness of that. It began with farmers, really, because they were the ones using the land, and started to say things like, this is not right, my cattle are ailing, crops are failing. There was sort of things like stillbirths in cattle, deformities in animals being born like sheep, horses, and cows. And still it was going on with questions being asked and no answers, until finally the government came out and officially took over 5 of the worst affected farms. So they surveyed, you filled up the forms to tell them what was going on. It was impacting human health as well. But they only really surveyed the animal health. And to this day, human health has never been surveyed. And that's something that really, an industry that's running and operating for 40 years with a lot of misgivings associated, it should be something that should be prominent on the list, but isn't. So, and I think the reason why is because of how the animal health and the reporting have been handled. And that was that they took over 2 farms, the health board from the Irish government took over 2 farms. Sorry, they took over 5 farms for 2 years. out of, I think, 35 that they had surveyed, and they monitored the situation. Locally, everyone heard that actually they were feeding the animals grain. They weren't really letting them eat off the land anyway. So when they came back with their findings and addressed the community in a very large community centre, everyone was there. It was a very heightened moment waiting for the results. And this is what happened. It was met with stunned disbelief, because basically the health board were saying, actually, the problem is with farming methods. It is not with the industry. Nothing had changed in the region for hundreds of years. And this was so disabling for people, because these were people who had been farming since they were kids, their parents before them, their grandparents, and on, and nothing had changed. And these were also the people who were pushing back on, we need answers, what is happening here? So you can imagine this was really a death knell, I would say. Immediately it was a death knell for activism in that area. And speaking with people since then, people who'd been very heavily involved and who'd really pushed for answers and had pushed for the government, you know, I think they thought there was maybe a naivety as well. Information at that point in you know, the 80s and 90s wouldn't have been as immediate as what it would be now, where we get our information, we can hop on Google, we can hop on the internet, we can search. Back then it wasn't that easy. And also things like sharing experiences, how we communicate with things like WhatsApp or email was not really an option, or very little of it then, certainly not WhatsApp. So this was, you know, so debilitating. Speaking to activists from that time, they said, that was it for me. I stepped out. I couldn't invest any more of my time. I was so emotionally involved. I'd missed out on time with my family. My kids are growing older now. They need me. The government has let us down. If the government can't stand up for us against a multinational, then who will? So it just became this moment of quietness. And also at that time, I remember being a kid and a teenager and coming home from school, and it would be on the national news. You'd see it on TV. It would be your neighbours, people you would know speaking about it. And that all sort of quietly went away, and it doesn't get covered anymore. The reporter who wrote this article has since retired, and she was never really replaced. And also she was writing for a very local newspaper with a small distribution. So stories wouldn't really get to the national press anymore, or the stories that did get there were more about things like investment, or how it was doing in the stock exchange, or in fact, it has now changed hands since 2007. It's now Rusal, which is a Russian-owned company, and there's no sanctions by the Irish government on this company, despite the fact that we also taken quite a lot of Ukrainian refugees, and in my community, they're living there quite happily for the last 3 years now. But it must be very jarring to see, you know, this at the edge of town, this industry that's also funding a war machine. So I started to make artwork about that, and to think about it and try and make sense of it myself. And a part of that, in a way, was also looking at how the industry would frame themselves, and how they would, frame up where they are. So when they built the refinery, they built in this nature reserve around it, which is sort of a bit ironic, considering that it was a very natural part of the world. And also an extension, really, of that Burn UNESCO site. It's the same rock formation. It would be limestone in that area. It would have had very specific biodiversity, very specific, bird populations. But a proper base level had never been done before the industry moved in, conveniently. So there's nothing that you can kind of compare that to. You can only keep track now and see if anything changes in that way. So this is a really enlarged sign. I show this in different ways. This is, as Kate mentioned in my bio, I showed in part of a group exhibition in Berlin just this summer. And when you're showing with other people, you also have to be considerate of other people's work, and how that might be a flow as well when you're thinking about exhibition making. Here in the university, I have the space all to myself, so I can kind of be a bit more out there. But you will notice that these two images appear here. They're slightly bigger. Here in the university, they're printed with a backing, but here it's vinyl that's directly onto the wall. And this is the cover of the nature trail around the refinery. And I always think how amazing it is. And this is an artist's representation then of the refinery. So you can hardly, in the background is this wonderfully clean industry with lovely white smoke coming out. Hardly there. The smoke, blends in with the clouds, so it becomes more natural. It's folded into the environment. It's how we see it. And this image over here, I have a better shot of this later on that I will talk in depthly about, because I think it kind of points to this a lot. But it's this framing of how an industry frames itself, that they're gifting to the community this nature trail, this healthy place with which that you can take your walks and get your steps in and get your exercise. But it's almost this kind of way of framing something, but meanwhile over here is that massive 450 acres of redmud that would probably cover the entire campus. And then also at one point there was a visitor centre there that you could visit, which they closed down during, I think, the first lockdown in the pandemic and never really opened again. But they would bring schools there sometimes to talk through mainly how great aluminium is and what it's used in and how ubiquitous a material it is, which it is. We couldn't really have modern life without it, but that doesn't mean we need to make new aluminium every single day either. So in their visitor centre would be a map, and again this telltale red area was just grey. So if you come in and you're not sure what you're looking at, you're just like, this could be just a scrubland, or it could be, you know, another field or something else. And so I remade this to scale map from just taking photographs from what they had inside there. And when I show this, I showed it several times where I'll show the map and these images together to sort of play on the polarities of what we're being offered, you know, as the image of this industry and what's actually there, what we can see and how it's affecting us. Here's a close-up here again. Also within on the Copenhagen building, you'll see an image like this as well. I'll update it every couple of years because it does change, but you can see it's sort of like these sort of, it's a Google, but you can see like the tidal depths here. The tide is out in this particular one. In the one that's in the Copenhagen building, it's in. But so you just get the sense of how close. I mean, it's mere meters away actually from the Shannon estuary here. I'll also show, because this is part of my larger archive, which is called Stigma Damages, and this comes from a legal name that pertains to damages incurred by like environmental duress or industry. So for example, I have a house, I'm living a very happy life, the industry comes in, it's beside me, I don't like it, I'm going to move, I put my house up for sale, I discover that actually the price is demarcated on account of this industry. So in theory, I could sue this industry, any industry, for stigma damages, the stigma of living beside something like that, of trying to sell something. But in actual fact, am I really going to, you know, sue a multi-billion industry that's not in fact an Irish-owned industry anyway? Probably not. So part of that is comprising an archive that I've been doing for some years. The artworks I make also sit within the archive. So the archive is and of itself an artwork. But also it's a very live entity. So things like, you won't see them here, these are stamps that were made in Guyana, I believe, with by Disney, portraying Mickey Mouse, the cartoon character, driving a digger in a bauxite mine, and then also working in a refinery with a hard hat. This is because industry gets so enmeshed in governments, particularly in the global south. It comes in and it offers things like clean water, schools, and then once the industries are established, they move, and there isn't really anything you can do because the jobs are there. They're so part of the infrastructure that there isn't a whole lot that can happen. And this was another study sort of in the area where they'd been talking very basically about the land before the industry came, but it was a report that was commissioned by the industry itself. So there's sort of various levels of credibility as well as we go on. Here's a close-up. Again, you can see like this would have been, I'm really enjoying the spotter, you can tell I'm just like picking at it all the time. But it's great, otherwise I'd be running over and back. This is an old railway bridge and this is an old railway line. And interestingly, the infrastructure on this area is changing a lot. They're reopening this line now. So what they've done is this bridge has been rebuilt almost. But they've built like this massive concrete wall here. So if you're traveling on the train, you won't see that bit. I mean, you'll probably see all over here, but you won't see this bit. And at the moment, that's for freight rather than customers, but that could change as well. So this is a still from the video work, which I will show in a little while. This was a recent exhibition I did in Ireland in Sligo, where it was a 5-person show, and this was a very useful thing for me to do in a way because it was true 5 rooms as opposed to 1 space. And it makes you, in a sense, it can become a way of telling a story or narrating a certain dialogue that you pass through and think about in a theatrical way or not. Part of it was considering how to show it. This was like a flat a flat screen on these sort of legs here. But what I was showing was that in recent years, I had visited Australia just in 2023 and connected with activists there in a place called Yarloop, and also in Pinjarra, which is Western Australia, maybe like 2-3 hours outside of Perth. And there's this range of mountain there called the Darling Range, and it has some really good quality bauxite. It's Alcoa that run the show there, the Aluminium Company of America. And for years, they've also been campaigning to push back. But in around 2006, I saw a newspaper article where at one point the industry there, the people had taken on the industry and really pushed back. But they also had celebrity activists, Erin Brockovich championed them. And I think that makes a big difference if you have somebody who's very visible or some celebrity who can kind of come in like that. And they have their own following and platforms. It just draws attention in a way. But in that particular instant, the people won and they did get some reparation. But the battle continues all of the time. But at that point, when it turned up in the newspaper, it turned up in Irish newspapers because activists in my area were saying, actually, this is really important. It's always the same process for aluminium refining. It can be different for the smelting part, but for the refining, it's the Bayer process. So it was the Bayer process that was used there as well. And I mean, it read like an actual playbook of the same things that have been happening in our region, same things happening in human health, in animal health, how it's impacting the land. You know, things would be stunted or not growing. And the activists were saying, listen, look at this, we shouldn't give up here. You know, out in Australia, like, they're after taking this on, they've won, look at this, it's the same process, this is what's happening. And at that time, I was quite early in a certain strand of research, and it was too soon for me really to think about even engaging in that. But I did have the opportunity in 2023 to go there and met with activists there. And it was really compelling, the kind of work, the drive that they were doing, because, you know, people get burnt out having to deal with industry all of the time. We're human. The industry is sort of like this faceless entity in a way. Some of that work is shown again in the Copenhagen building on a flat screen. And you can listen to that as well. There's like a opportunity to do that. But one of the activists I worked with, Vince, he's incredible as well. He's sort of part. He features in some of the work, and he also features in some of the podcasts I've been making. But being out there, the groups were saying, you should really get tested for heavy metal in your body. And I was saying, well, why? I left where I was from at around 18, and I went to college, and then I was, a jobbing artist, going on the residency trail, living out of suitcases, and I really only moved back in 2020. And they were saying, yeah, but if the production was high when you were a child, that would have entered your system, and you can't leave, once these kind of levels go in, it doesn't leave. So I thought, okay, I'll do this, I'll go. And they said, and actually get your daughter tested as well. I was like, but she hasn't even, she hasn't really lived here only for a couple of years. And they were like, it wouldn't matter, it's your system, and you would have passed that down if there's something there. So we went and got tested. It was just in a pharmacy with a machine that's very non-invasive, and they just check your points in your hand to check it. And lo and behold, my aluminium levels were, not a surprise really, I guess. This was my aluminium levels. The adults in Pinjarra, they were down in the yellows, but I was red. So it works like a system of, okay, red is really bad, green is okay, and yellow is sort of not great. But it was interesting because the same things that were present in mine were present in theirs as well, because it was the same process, the same imprint, the same telltale chemicals and metals that were in the system. And of course, my daughter had quite high levels as well, because my body had carried her. And these are things that we should all be aware of, that, you can make a decision then what you're going to do with your life, or that it's not such a surprise. But in that installation I showed, these are, as I was saying to students yesterday, I was trying to describe overhead projectors, because I thought perhaps it might be something that is a very antiquated piece of technology that nobody sees anymore, and certainly they're very hard to come by anyway, but I think they're great. So they work like this, this kind of light box here projects up onto this and then out onto here. So I had a sheet of acetate, and then I put bauxite rock that I had brought back from Australia in my suitcase to kind of frame that in a way and think about it. So it was really, in those 5 spaces, 3 of those rooms had, this was one room, there was 2 videos in another, and then the larger space was laid out in a different way. So you can see again here, things like silver, cadmium, mercury, nickel, all of these things are tested for. And it's sort of like that, what they were doing in Western Australia was that they were getting a lot of people tested. They were going to schools and getting tested. The guy who was doing this on me said, listen, that's 2 tests. You can see quite clearly that whatever is affecting your environment or has affected your body in the past is affecting your daughters. But if you went and got 50 of those tests in your region or 100 in your region, then the things like this thumbprint of the aluminium or the silver, you can look through that and go, okay, this is the cadmium, the mercury. These are the things that are existing or the leftover of those processes. And you can see that, we've all been affected by the one thing, which is very hard to prove. And in actual fact, something like that wouldn't stand up in a court of law, but it could get the ball rolling towards maybe government looking at doing something more serious with things like blood tests or hair tests, or very tricky. And then there was a large room within the exhibition, and I kind of like to show like this way where the audience can enter and make some decisions on their own rather than trying to be preaching, which I hope I'm not doing this evening. But I'm pretty sure you'll tell me if I am. So this was a really interesting, sort of a newer way of exhibition design for me. I had a friend working this very closely with me to make it look a little bit like, I suppose, an investigation really. That, you go to a police station and you have these kind of boards and things are pinned, and it's like laying out what's happening, laying out the crime scene investigation. So I put various elements in again, this like how the industry is sort of portraying itself, this beautiful image here again with the beautiful clean industry. And then this was, I wonder if this shows up a bit closer. Yeah, there it is, there's this. So you see how almost bucolic the industry is in the background. In real life, what happens here is this is a constant building site. So these high containers, there's containers over here as well. Sorry, these are the ones more so. They're because the chemicals that are inside them and being holded and going up inside of these chimneys are so corrosive that they actually erode from the inside. And so after a period of, there's a life cycle. After a period of maybe 5 years, they have to be replaced. So there's always people, builders on site, rebuilding that. And then by the time they're at a point of collapse, they'll just swap them out really quickly. They also have washers for cars. So every employee who works there has to wash their car on the way out because the air is so corrosive. It eats into things like rubbers in your car windows. Your windscreen wipers will be eaten into. It just decays. So they're all told they have to, it's part of it. When you go in, you just see these like proper, like you'd see like in a garage or a petrol station, these quite large washers you have to wash in. When you're taking these beautiful walks as well around here, depending on, again, on the wind direction, that looks okay, it's going that way. But sometimes it comes over this way for the most part, and you're getting that really strong smell of caustic in your nose. This is me interviewing some people out in Western Australia. For that, there's a couch there. For that exhibition, I also decided to make a kind of like a website that can be used for, an alternative way of looking at the industry, an alternative education, if you like. And on that website are a series of podcasts. So there's 2 up there at the moment. This is a marathon, so I'm kind of releasing them slowly into the atmosphere. One is with Vince Puccio, the activist I worked very closely with in Western Australia. The second one was with Mimi Scheller, who's an academic who writes a lot about particularly the Caribbean and how mining has affected there and refining and industry's effect on that. This is the image I was speaking briefly about earlier, but you can see close up now. I always think this really embodies where things begun with industry coming into Ireland. So this was our very handsome former Prime Minister, Sean Lemass, who was opening up the doors of Ireland with wonderful sweetheart deals and tax breaks for foreign industry to come in. We were in a moment as well of, I suppose, being post-colonial in the sense that we had left Britain, we were becoming our own entity again, and we're very much about pushing away from maybe the East and pushing more towards the West and how we were looking at industry. And it was just this way of, almost like an advertisement, this cover of Time magazine, where you've got these, the beautiful textile curtains that is Ireland, this kind of creepy leprechaun down here, and this again. Look at the cleanliness, those lines, architecturally, this beautiful industry. I mean, this could be you. Come to Ireland, you won't have to pay very much tax, and then this is what you're getting: new spirit in the old sod. Yeah, so it's that kind of, to look at these industries and how are they getting in. You also have to look at the history of a country and how the government works. And when an industry like that first came in, there wouldn't have been the EPA. That came later. So it was primed and open. How am I doing for time, Kate? Am I good? This is how it would have looked before the industry came in. So you can see it was this beautiful island full of its own natural resources. And I'm kind of jumping around, so you get to kind of see this in the threads of the story as well. But it was very beautiful. Local poets would have written about it, almost forewarning of what would happen ahead. These were the kind of advertisements that were going into the newspapers at the time in the 80s. The industry was coming in, and they were the great savior of the region. Really, they were going to come in. And they were going to educate us. They were going to educate the local knowledge and the local people. I always think, this could be me here. I'd be roughly around that age, perhaps, maybe a little younger. But it's so patronizing to think that I couldn't spell where I was from. I would need an industry to come in to show me the way. These are some stills from a video I'm going to show you shortly, where that is the bauxite rock. And this is their own promotional thing. So you get that bauxite rock. And what comes out is this kind of white powdered in alumina, like this fine grain. These are those photographs I was showing earlier. We're too far away in installation. So you have Mickey having a great time there in the mine, digging a bit of bauxite. And then over here in the refinery, very clean. Oh, this is supposed to be bauxite mine. Okay, yeah. Anyway, very clean looking again. Look, not a speck in him. But again, it's like, how does this happen? It's Sierra Leone. How can an industry take over like the national postage system and put their own and join up with Disney? It's anyway, that's a bigger talk, but let's get through it. These are again looking through, and these all sit within my archive then as well. And when I show them an exhibition, I will think about the place where I'm showing. I would think about what might chime in with what's there in that place, or I'll select certain things that go in with this. This is from an editorial from In Company magazine. So I went to an archive, a library archive, and found all of these. This particularly addresses the fact that every now and again, more frequently in the 80s, but it still happens, there would be, you'd get up in the morning and there would be this fine red dust on your car, but it would be grainy, it would kind of damage it too. And at the time, it sort of fitted really well in with this narrative of the red dust from the Sahara, which does happen, to be fair, though not as frequently as what the industry would like you to believe. It gets pulled up into the air and circulated throughout Europe, and it ends up landing just in West Limerick, just in the west of Ireland, in this particular area. So it's happening a lot. It would be mentioned in the radios. You get up and there'd be this fine, soft kind of. But also you can see in those earlier photographs, it is an open pit, and it's beside quite a large, vast waterway. Nothing grows in that. All they do is they just keep it wet. They have these water cannons that just keep it wet and damp at all times. But of course, if you get a storm, or the Atlantic winds come in, and one of these like tail ends of a tropical storm from the States or something, you do get a dust event that happens there. But this is where the sands of the Sahara peep in. But you can see this kind of, again, the balance of somebody who works in the refinery and how they have to consider, let's say, the wellness of the industry and how that's being fed to them in the company newsletter, that they have to think about that, or like a subliminal thing of thinking about that as they go back into their own community to live too. Here's the one that exists in the visitor centre that you can't access now anymore. But at that point, they had just mooted the expansion of this bit. That's done now, of course. And then all the grey, the pretty grey. Here's a close-up again, a still image of the video I'm going to show in a sec. This kind of, landscaping, planting of trees here. I don't know if you see it, they're very pretty. It's, this kind of, we're doing good things, we're being green. it's like trying to, put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, really, to be honest. And then you can have a picnic here, if you like, as part of the walkways. I think this is also still from the video. It's such a striking image. I go in as a visual artist, and there's also I'm framing in my mind these things and going, this is so ironic, but also deadly serious. And, if you sit here, you're not going to be able to eat your lunch or whatever you're going to be doing, because the smell of caustic, the bang of caustic, it produces, it kind of tastes like a wet cement in the back of your throat, or sometimes it can cause nosebleeds, or you get headaches. You can get really bad headaches. So you wouldn't linger here long with your lunch. You'd move along quickly. And then this brings me back to today, where in March 2022 there was a big kind of expose on our national RTE news, where they were talking about the connection between Rusal. The main oligarch that runs that is Oleg Deripaska, who is very good friends with Vladimir Putin. And they were tracing this genealogy and this connection between how Deripaska also has a war machine. He makes these tanks, and how that's connected. So whether the aluminium is going directly into making tanks, or whether it's just fueling the war machine that is in Europe, this is what's going on. And there's that question as well, of course, of Irish neutrality within all of that. This is Marupal in March. These are the kind of machines that another sort of strand of what Deripaska works on. Works in aluminium refinery, and he makes these as well. And that's what they're capable of. This is an activist group that is based in County Clare. This is the last barrier and boundary between what could happen in my region. And as you can see, these are people who are doing it on a voluntary basis. Out in Australia, the industries there's a lot of mining, and there's a lot of different companies involved in particularly bauxite mining. But they spend a lot of money on university educations for people, but also, they'll do surveys and reports. One of those surveys I thought was very interesting and smart, where again you think they're providing something for a community, but it's also providing information for themselves. It's where they study a community or an activist group. And their conclusion was that the lifespan of an activist group, certainly in Western Australia, was somewhere between 5 to 7 years. Now think about that for a moment. 5 to 7 years. It seems like a long time, but it's not. And if you know something like that, and you're a big industry, you're a managing director even, in fact, you can say to yourself, all I have to do really here is sit it out. I'll just ignore a few emails. I let a conversation drift. I listen to people, but I won't really do anything. And there's something it's genius, really, when you think about how an industry can study civilization, I guess, in that way. But you can see these are the people. So there as well, extension. So they were looking for an extension, and in, I think it was 23, they got a big pushback. They were looking to extend that to, 33 meters or whatever that would be. I never thought I would see that, to be honest with you. They've never been pushed back by the EPA or the Irish government before, but things are changing. We're all changing. We're all becoming more aware of, a word like climate change is something everybody can, speak to in a way, or at least is aware of. We're all aware more of our environments, maybe post-pandemic. We spent a lot of time where we are. And it's a whole new generation of people coming through who are thinking in different ways and are more aware of this. So I got the pushback, which means that in 2030, the industry is mooted to close. Now, they're going to go ahead, I'm sure, and try again to put in for an expansion license. But 2030 is really no time away. And there's no plan in place by the industry for a just transition of the workforce or of the plot, the land itself. Also putting in things like applications for dumping at sea. This isn't the red mud. This is the grit and the things that get gathered at their port that, wedge up the port, and then the ships can't get in. But what comes in also goes out here. Nothing really comes in by road. So you get your bauxite ore coming in here, some of it falls off, okay. You also get the ships carrying in caustic, which is a very warm material. Some of that might spill. So they want to pull this out and bring it away over here. Now, they've done this before. It comes over here, that's where it goes. But this time, they wanted to expand that really exponentially, and to, you know, it's like 83,556 tons per annum. And that activist group I showed you, Future-Proof Clare, they've come out and they've done campaigns to stop that. This was the kind of thing that would go into. The Weekly Observer has the tiniest readership of the area. So it would turn up, it might stay there for maybe 2 weeks, 21 days, and then it would be gone, and nobody would have put in a complaint and said, no, actually, nobody would put in something against it. But interestingly, the EPA came out about that in 2023 and said, no, this isn't good enough. You need to put this into the national press, more than one newspaper, and you need to list it in there for at least a 6-week period. So again, these are like, they might seem like little things, but they're really not, because they've never happened before. And this is sort of like a change. I can see this as a change, or at least I want to believe that. So I might just finish on that, and then maybe Kate will maybe mediate for real Q&As. So if you've got other questions there, go ahead. But Kate, do you want to? And I'm going to get some more water.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's thank Michele for her talk. Yeah, I'm sure there are loads of questions, and I'm glad that you just dove into them. So feel free to, just raise your hand. Please wait to get the mic so that you can, oh yes, and it's there as well, to make sure that your question is heard. So.
Okay. Thank you for your talk, Michele. Very interesting. It's funny because first I wanted to ask you something about, because you described how this place, they create this image and this false image of nature, and then I wanted to ask you, well, the works you showed from your exhibitions, they're also quite, they're not countering that image, so to speak, or the aesthetics. You're actually sharing them again. Like, to what extent would you be fortifying that image? But in the end, after seeing the video, it sort of changes, because you're countering their image with your imagery. And maybe the power is that it is sort of documentary style and not taking a counter position, but actually showing without. So I wonder, how do you feel about that, the aesthetic relation of your image versus their image and their play with image, and also in terms of responsibility and community, like what happened, how did it play out, how would you maybe in the future also think about that relation and the strengths or maybe weaknesses of having this sort of situation? Because it seems to be like one bad guy and then a room full of people that enjoy it, but then obviously the challenge of art is having this multi vocal situation. So maybe I hope I'm a bit clear.
No, that's great. There's multiple questions there, I think. But
yeah, sorry.
I guess first of all, how I think about, first of all, I guess the industry has quite a lot of money for their campaigns, for PR, etc. So they can produce these very luscious images too, or these kind of maps about the region. And I'm not trying to, if I don't put in the original thing that exists that they're trying to portray, then it's hard to imagine, if you're not familiar with it or the area, it's hard to imagine what I'm trying to counteract with that. And also, coming in as a visual artist, these are decisions I'm making aesthetically and choices I'm making about how I lay something out in exhibition planning and making throughout. And then with the question of like the how to, I guess also I'm learning when it comes to how to move into community like that. And this was something I did only 2 years ago, without fully really realizing before I did it, just how people, I knew people would be, it's a very complicated and complex subject. I knew people would respond in that way, but I didn't quite imagine the heightened emotions. And I think that might have been caused or somehow encouraged by the aggressiveness of that man in the first, he was the first person to talk, and his first sentence was, "This is lies." And, really before I had and he kind of came in with this thing of, "But we use aluminium all the time." And I said, yes. And what about the jobs? And, I'd kind of begun my conversation saying, I'm not about taking away from the jobs. I'm talking about just transition of finding, ways where this could be a better neighbor, better corporate neighbor. because I'm aware that the narrative of jobs is always something that is very important and vital for people who work there, but and in any kind of small community or bigger communities as well. But I find that, I think had he not have come in so aggressive, I think people might not have been so strong in how they presented themselves as well. I mean, at the beginning, when it all kicked off, 2 people walked out. I think it was just too much. It was just like, what's going to happen here? And just walked out. But I think it's quite a curious thing that, you know, he also positioned himself very interestingly, where he sat in a table at the back of the room rather than in a chair, so that when he started doing the shouting, everyone turned around and he was already on a platform. It was very smart. I was going, this is really interesting, you know, to just watch this. Like, so he was already up on a platform, and everyone was directing themselves towards him and almost trying to justify themselves to him. So he almost became the industry, which maybe isn't what he wanted. But I think it's fair to say there will always be, if I'm doing a public discussion, not here, but in a community or in a situation that's not a cultural institution, that is maybe more for a general audience, I think it'd be fair to say there will always be one person who will be there, who will be in that role, who will be deliberately there to be in that role, to provocate or to discredit or to do that. And I think instead of being afraid of that moment, for me as a presenter, I would like to lean into it, because I think there's a lot to learn from those moments. I think they also, whether they like it or not, activate the rest of the audience in a really interesting way that impassion them a bit more. And I think that's maybe what art is a lot for me, is that you can create these spaces where, you know, people aren't really thinking about art as being something that's so critical and so engaged in something like that. It becomes a place where, you know, I'm just going to an artist talk, I'm just going to a film screening, and then it becomes something else. But I have a lot to learn, I have to say, and I wouldn't imagine that every situation I find myself in would be the same as this. It could be more or less, but I guess it's learning from having conversations with people and dialogue and just being in the moment as well. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but other than I'm still learning about how to be in communities like that and talk through it in a way, because it's sort of, it's not an old story, it's very much a live and evolving story all of the time. Yeah. I promise my next answer will be shorter if anyone says.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions. So I think I saw the, okay, we'll go to the back then. No, I saw the hands in the front first, but go ahead. We are I just try to keep your questions a bit concise because we are running low on time. No, not just. I'm just saying because there's a lot of people who want to share a question. But please remember, there's also a reception afterwards in which you can also ask questions as well. So.
Thank you for the workshop yesterday and for this talk. I was wondering how, as an artist, you can disconnect yourself from such a sensitive and personal subject, or are you ever able to disconnect from it?
It's so hard, actually. I think when I first started making work about it, I found it really difficult to switch off. And so what would happen would be I would have to take breaks. So I'd have really intense times of maybe researching something or making an exhibition and spending a year or 2 years and then going, I can't, I'm just exhausted, I can't think about it. And I would step away and I'd go, maybe this is it. Maybe I've made all the work I can make about this. And then I would step away, and then suddenly something would pull me back in, because the industry itself is also, it's moving and shifting all of the time, and it's, you know, it's everywhere, and there's different things to think about in terms of either health or economy or ecology or, you know, like global connections, all of that. And I just find, I think I'm better able to see when that exhaustion is coming now as I've gone on in my research, that I'm able to balance it more. But yeah, it can be hard. I try to like step out, as even when I see myself on the screen, sometimes like that, I try to just see myself as a subject as well, just to sort of like that protection of yourself in a way. It can be difficult. I think when I was in Australia 2 years ago, that was for me, I was hearing people were sharing testimony and I was bearing witness, and all of this is, they knew they were being recorded for podcasts. They were deliberately telling me things that they could share it out there so other people around the world can hear these stories and be in solidarity. That was difficult. Like at the end of maybe a 9-hour day and you're hearing these harrowing stories, that was really difficult. But yeah, you just have to, if you're doing this kind of work that's sort of has a foot in both camps of maybe activism and community and visual art, you need to sort of take care of yourself as well and take those head spaces and breaks. Yeah. Another thing I'm still learning about.
In the front, right? I think there was a question.
I guess I'll apologize for a loaded question, but you've talked about the connection of the refinery to the war in Ukraine, and the timeline of it appearing in Ireland kind of like rang bells in me. That's the time of the Troubles. So I was wondering if maybe you have looked into the potential connection of Irish history or like of history of exploitation to the, I guess, exploitation of land. Yeah.
Do you mean in Irish exploiting land, or Irish people, Irish land being exploited?
I would say both in a way, because I think they're quite connected. Because you mentioned how there is this sort of pattern of exploitation of the global south. So I was wondering if it's something similar with those big companies coming to exploit countries at a very vulnerable time.
It is. I think it definitely is. I mean, a good example also of that would be in Iceland in around 2007, where the Icelandic government resisted these industries coming in for so long. You had like American companies and Canadian companies looking there. So in Iceland, their natural resources are quite remarkable with their geothermal energies, and smelters would love to go in there because it costs them less, because they can just tap into that natural resources. So for years they resisted, and then when their economy collapsed and they had recession in like 2007 and 8, that's when the doors opened. And there's now, I think, 2, if not 3 smelters. And smelters are, worse in many ways. They just use huge amount of energies and they impact so much on the land around. But where they are in Iceland is the population is lower anyway and sparse. But yes, it is a moment where they can kind of move in, and once they're in, it's hard then to extract them from those moments. But I think with the Ukrainian thing of it is that it was in 2007 when that company got kind of taken over by Rusal, and I don't think people really noticed. Locally, because it's just another company. It doesn't matter where they're from, And I think when the war started, when Ukraine was invaded, I think that was when people realized, suddenly newspaper reports were saying, yeah, this is a Russian company. The Russian flag used to fly, on the edge of the company along with the Irish flag, and that got taken down around that time discreetly. But the entranceways are still bilingual signage in Russian and English, and it's these complexities as well where sometimes you think these issues are far away, but they're really not. Yeah, I'm not sure if that really, I think that's a big, larger discussion that that we could really take off in many directions. But yeah, you're right, it does tend to happen where, I think heavy industry are certainly opportunists in the sense where they're following these kind of strands and strata of economies and can see where there's a moment to strike, Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great question also to end on, because I think entire books have been written about this kind of power relation. So yeah, and it was a beautiful answer to just hear how that was in your experience.
But I will be at the reception. Feel free to come and interrogate me. I saw some other hands there.
So we will, yes, so we will be having a reception, but we would like to first highlight that Michele has actually curated a Stigma Damages exhibit here at Tilburg University that you can visit until mid-June. And yesterday, we quickly made a little video to walk you through this exhibit. So I will just play that for you now, and then we will close off this talk. Welcome to the Stigma Damages exhibit at Tilburg University in the spring of 2025. Stigma Damages is an ongoing arts-based research project by Irish artist Michele Horrigan. Horrigan uses found objects, archival materials, and video installations to engage with the ongoing environmental injustices of Europe's largest bauxite refinery, Aughinish Alumina, near where she lives and works. We encounter bauxite through, as you'll learn in the exhibit, aluminum products that we use every day. We use them in our phones, in drinking containers, in bicycles, cars, and trains, and also in internet cabling. Aluminum is everywhere. And yet, the process of rendering bauxite rocks into alumina powder creates caustic air emissions as well as a toxic industrial waste product for which there is no viable recycling process, waste management process, or way of using it. As a result, this red dust piles up next to refineries, and the facilities continuously dump water on it to keep it from blowing around. This creates spaces of extreme toxicity. As cultural studies scholars, when we go to an exhibit and encounter content like this, we're of course thinking about what we're learning. But we're also looking at how this information is conveyed, what media are used, what aesthetic trends is this exhibit building on, what art histories is it engaging with. And these are things that come up in this particular Stigma Damages exhibit in the images and video installations you'll see here.
This is a 1980s commissioned painting from the refinery, showing Aughinish Alumina in tune with nature. Here we see a very colorful watercolor depiction of a happy fox family in nature, also enjoying the refinery. Here the refinery really blends into this narrative of a pure nature. Even the clouds fuse with the steam of the refinery. This is a 2007 advertisement remediating the same narratives from earlier. It's from the Russo company, a Russian-owned company that took over the refinery during that time. It showcases the nature trail leading up to the refinery, which was then embellished with natural elements, like these animals. Especially interesting are the butterflies, who had their own built-in sanctuary in this refinery. This has unfortunately already been demolished, and many of the butterflies have not been seen since. Michele Horrigan also talks about this in one of her video installations.
These images that we see of the environment surrounding the refinery are likely to not be surprising to most viewers, as they emerge out of a longer history of landscape painting. We see nature, plants and animals existing comfortably alongside human society and industry. However, what Michele Horrigan does in this exhibition is flip this narrative on its head. With a Google Maps screen capture from above, we can see that in fact the refinery has deeply impacted the surrounding environment. This supposedly untouched space where plants and animals and humans are thriving are implicated in the toxic byproduct of the refinery. The mud flats which are created are a result of the processes in which all of these different minerals and these toxic elements are seeping into the landscape. Horrigan's curation does not explain the differences between these two narratives. Instead, what she asks is for us, the viewer, to co-produce the meaning of this exhibit, to come to the understanding that nature and culture are not so separate as that which is being represented in these 1980s depictions of the environment surrounding the refinery. By seeing the refinery from above, we come to understand that nature and culture are in fact sharing the very same space, that we human beings are drinking the water and breathing the air of the refinery in the same way that the plants and animals surrounding this space are, that all of us come to be implicated in the toxicity of the activity of refining aluminum.
So as you can see, the content and the curation of this exhibit come together to make meaning. And we see this in particular in the video installations that Michele Horrigan has created. For example, in this video installation about a bauxite mine and refinery in Western Australia, in Pinjarra, the exhibition viewer goes and looks through a screen, often at the screen, of environmental justice activist Vince Puccio. This emphasis on screens foregrounds the media that are being used to create these art installations. And this embeds the viewer in the very environments about which they are learning. It reminds us that materials are always extracted from the earth to create, for example, the built environments even of this gallery space. And this is something that cultural studies scholars will look at and think about, how is the art in a gallery space making meaning, and how is that gallery space actually coming with the content, the media, the form, and the various aesthetic and art histories that we're learning about in such an exhibit. So as we're visiting the Stigma Damages exhibit, we're made aware of how we are all collectively complicit in the uneven distribution of the benefits and burdens of extraction economies. Yet we're also collectively invited to imagine more environmentally and socially just futures. So we hope that you will come to this exhibit and help to think about how we together can use art and culture to imagine a better world. Thank you. That's introverts on camera. So I want to thank a lot of people just to close this session. And first of all, of course, I would love to thank Michele for coming all the way here and sharing her work. She's been here all week helping to build this exhibit under some unexpected conditions, has done workshops with many students, helping to think about their process in making videos themselves about environmental issues. Today we recorded a little podcast, and he being here today giving this lecture. So thank you so much, Michele, for all that you do. We really appreciate it. Of course, it takes many people and many hands to make these things come together. So I would also like to thank all of those people who helped bring Michele to our campus. This lecture would not have been possible, of course, without the generous support of Studium Generale and especially Hanne van den Bos. And setting up the Stigma Damages exhibit required a lot of dedication, flexibility, and creativity of many students and colleagues, and particularly those in the Department of Academic Heritage, Marianne van Hest, Peter Siebers, and Joep van Gennep. They were amazing. And none of this, of course, would have been possible without the generous support of the Cultural Heritage and Identity Sector Plan Research Group, the Tilburg School of Humanities and Digital Sciences, and of course my own department, the Department of Culture Studies, in which my colleagues Sean Smith and Clara Daniels have been essential to making all of this come together. So please join us for the reception in Esplanade after giving all these amazing people a final round of applause.